Trump just lost it. In what might be the most stunning diplomatic meltdown in decades, the President of the United States terminated all trade negotiations with Canada over a television advertisement. Not a cyber attack, not a border dispute, not even a trade violation, an ad. But this isn't just any commercial. This is Ontario Premier Doug Ford using Ronald Reagan's own words to demolish Trump's tariff agenda, and it's driving the president absolutely insane. Here's what happened, why Ford is doubling down by airing the ad during the World Series, and how this single minute-long commercial just changed the entire dynamic of North American trade. The story begins with what should have been routine trade discussions. For weeks, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had been negotiating with Trump's team in Washington, trying to ease the punishing 35% tariffs that Trump slapped on Canadian goods back in July. These weren't minor trade adjustments. We're talking about tariffs that were crushing Canadian industries, particularly in Ontario where the auto sector was hemorrhaging jobs. Just this month, Stellantis announced it was moving a production line from Ontario to Illinois, a direct result of Trump's trade war. But Ontario Premier Doug Ford wasn't content to sit back and let federal negotiators handle everything quietly. Ford, who calls himself a big Ronald Reagan fan, had a different strategy in mind. On October 16th, he launched a $75 million advertising blitz across American television networks, and the centerpiece was a 1-minute ad featuring audio from Ronald Reagan's April 25, 1987 radio address about free trade. The ad was surgical in its precision. Over cinematic shots of American workers and landscapes, Reagan's voice delivers a devastating critique of protectionism itself.
President Trump is shutting down trade talks with Canada over an ad campaign funded by the government of Ontario. The ad uses excerpts from former President Reagan's address in 1987. Here's a part of the ad.
High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
President Trump reacting on Truth Social, writing, quote, "They only did this to interfere with the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court." In caps, tariffs are very important to the national security and economy of the USA. For more, Bloomberg's Brendan Murray joins us now. Brendan, where does this leave US-Canada, given that Ontario is not Canada, but it is having national implications for the country?
Yeah, I think you've got two real issues here. One is sort of the tantrum that Trump has thrown based on this ad, and you can argue that the ad does kind of do some creative editing with the April 1987 radio address from then President Reagan, But the bigger issue here is the evident.
The former president's words carry unmistakable authority as he explains how tariffs might look patriotic at first, protecting American products and jobs. Sometimes they even work for a short while. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. Reagan warns that high tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industry shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. Ford's team strategically placed this ad on Fox News, Fox Sports, Newsmax, Bloomberg, NBC, CBS, and ABC. They targeted Republican districts across the country, knowing that Reagan's voice carries unmatched authority among conservative voters. The ad ran during high-profile events, including the American League Championship Series that featured the Toronto Blue Jays. For days, the ad campaign seemed to be working exactly as intended. It was generating conversation about tariffs, putting pressure on Trump from his own party's base, and giving Canadian negotiators additional leverage. Trump himself even acknowledged seeing the ad, saying at a public event, "I even see foreign countries now that we're doing very well with taking ads. Don't go with tariffs? I saw an ad last night from Canada. If I was Canada, I'd take that same ad also." But something shifted dramatically on Thursday night. The Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute released a scathing statement, claiming that the ad misrepresents the presidential radio address, and that the government of Ontario did not seek nor receive permission to use and edit the remarks. The foundation announced it was reviewing its legal options. Trump seized on this statement with characteristic fury.
Had a little bit stronger. Let's take a look at the fixed income open across Europe. Yields are holding in pretty well. We have seen a run up of higher yields, and that's off the back of a higher oil price yesterday. We had treasuries underperforming around 5 basis points across the curve. We're opening up pretty steady ahead of those European PMI prints coming out later this morning.
Absolutely. Credit was mentioning, though, what is happening with the loonie. You are seeing a reaction this morning in markets to the latest spat between Canada and the United States. U.S. trade negotiations with its neighbour, Canada, are apparently this morning in chaos. That's after President Trump announced that he was immediately ending talks with the country. In a post on Truth Social, the President of the United States wrote this: "Tariffs are very important to the national security and economy of the USA. Based on their egregious behaviour, all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated." The president has apparently taken issue with an advertisement funded by the government of Ontario that includes excerpts from an address President Reagan gave back in 1987, in which he defended the principles of free trade and slammed tariffs as an outdated idea that stifles innovation, drives up prices, and hurts U.S. workers.
The way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
Go back and watch the whole speech. I think that's probably a useful thing to do this morning as well. Obviously, there's a little bit of editing that's gone on, but nevertheless.
In a late-night Truth Social post, he exploded about Canada fraudulently using an advertisement featuring Ronald Reagan speaking negatively about tariffs. He emphasized that tariffs are very important to the national security and economy of the USA, and based on what he called Canada's egregious behavior, declared all trade negotiations with Canada hereby terminated. The president even suggested this was an attempt to interfere with a Supreme Court decision, though he didn't specify what law was allegedly broken. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic. Just hours earlier, reports suggested that Canada and the U.S. were days away from a potential deal that could have been signed at the upcoming APEC summit. Carney and Trump were both scheduled to attend, and sources indicated that negotiations had been progressing constructively. Trump's decision to blow up the talks caught the Canadian government completely by surprise.
The United States. Donald Trump has suddenly announced that all trade negotiations with Canada have been, quote, terminated. His decision coming out late tonight in a post on Truth Social. This is not the first time Trump has said he is ending trade talks with Canada, but it does come on the same day that Canada delivered a tariff blow of its own, targeting some U.S. automakers. So let's go right to Ashley Burke in Ottawa now. Ashley, can you take us through precisely what Trump is saying tonight?
Adrienne, Donald Trump declaring on social media that he's officially called off trade talks with Canada. It's over an advertisement from Ontario's government that's been playing on American networks. Ontario's premier recently launched the $75 million anti-tariff campaign using a video with the voice of former President Ronald Reagan. It's from his famous address in 1987. And in the video, Reagan is heard saying high tariffs lead to retaliation by foreign countries and trigger fierce trade wars. Trump wrote on Truth Social that the Ronald Reagan Foundation said it's fraudulently used. The foundation posted online that the ad misrepresents the president's radio address, and Ontario didn't have permission to use it. Trump also went on to write how important he says tariffs are to his country's economy and said, quote, based on their egregious behavior, all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated. Now, this all unfolded not even 2 hours after the federal government here in Canada announced it was taking action against 2 car manufacturers for scaling back production in this country. In one case, to move production to the U.S., which the White House had celebrated as a win. The federal government is hitting back at 2 big automakers. Ottawa calling it unacceptable that Stellantis and General Motors are both scaling back.
The federal government had already begun retaliating against U.S. automakers, reducing tariff-free vehicle imports from GM by 24% and from Stellantis by 50% in response to their scaling back of Canadian manufacturing. This represented a serious escalation in the trade relationship, with Canada actively targeting companies for moving production south of the border. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Rather than backing down, Ford doubled down in the most spectacular way possible. On Friday afternoon, he announced that while he would pause the ad campaign on Monday so that trade talks can resume, the advertisement would continue running through the weekend, specifically during the first two games of the World Series between the Toronto Blue Jays and the Los Angeles Dodgers. This is political theater at its finest. The Blue Jays making it to the World Series is already a massive source of national pride for Canadians. It's the country's only Major League Baseball team, and they're facing off against the Los Angeles Dodgers in what promises to be one of the most watched sporting events of the year.
Game one of the World Series between the Toronto Blue Jays and the Los Angeles Dodgers. That moment when all things seem possible. For the Jays players, their nerves, of course, as the weight of this sinks in. But as Jamie Strachan tells us, they're also feeling the support of an entire country behind them.
A final coat of paint, putting the final touches in place as Toronto welcomes the World Series north of the border.
Here's a pitch on the way, a swing and a belt, left field.
For the first time since 1993.
The Blue Jays are World Series champions.
It's just really cool for the organization, and I'm just thankful and humbled that I'm the one doing it.
Here comes the 3-2. He got him!
The team's magical, unexpected run to the World Series has fans delirious, snapping up Jays merch.
I picked up, the World Series hat. I had to get this because, after the World Series, we're not going to know the next time the Jays are going to make it.
I'm anxious, but in the best way. It's all excitement. I'm so proud, and I'm just excited to see what's going to happen.
A date with the storied Los Angeles Dodgers and their superstar Shohei Ohtani has the Jays under the bright lights of the global media.
I'm sure everyone's going to be a little nervous. You're supposed to be nervous.
But embracing what could be a once-in-a-career opportunity.
The pressure will kind of go away when you're in the moment, but it's great to have a whole country kind of behind you, and it's not just a city.
You don't know how many times you'll make it to the World Series in your life. Some people never do, so a lot of people never do. So I think just being super grateful for our opportunity and taking advantage of it by preparing the best you can and going out there and competing.
That countrywide support on display, a visit from the Prime Minister, who likes the Jays in sixth, but no bet yet with U.S. President Donald Trump.
I think he's afraid to make a bet.
It's their first World Series appearance since 1993, and the entire country is rallying behind them. Players have expressed gratitude for the nationwide support, with the Prime Minister even visiting the team. The city has set up massive watch parties at City Hall as fans snap up merchandise, and players acknowledge the nerves while embracing this once-in-a-career opportunity. Ford is essentially guaranteeing that millions of Americans will see Reagan's anti-tariff message during one of the biggest cultural moments of the year. His statement was carefully crafted to appear conciliatory while actually being defiant. Our intention was always to initiate a conversation about the kind of economy that Americans want to build and the impact of tariffs on workers and businesses. We've achieved our goal, having reached U.S. audiences at the highest levels. He added that after speaking with Prime Minister Carney, Ontario would pause the campaign so that trade talks can resume. The genius of Ford's strategy becomes clear when you look at the broader context. Trump's entire political brand is built on the idea that he's a master negotiator who can intimidate foreign leaders into submission. But here's a provincial premier, not even a national leader, using Trump's own party's most revered president to humiliate him on national television. And when Trump throws a tantrum and terminates negotiations, Ford responds by ensuring even more Americans will see the ad during the World Series. Trump's reaction reveals just how effective the ad campaign has been. On Friday morning, he posted again on Truth Social, "Canada cheated and got caught." They fraudulently took a big buy ad saying that Ronald Reagan did not like tariffs, when actually he loved tariffs for our country and its national security. The capitalization and exclamation points suggest a president who is genuinely rattled, but Trump's claim that Reagan loved tariffs is historically problematic. While Reagan's 1987 radio address did include a section defending some specific tariffs he had imposed on Japan at the time, the broader context of his presidency was overwhelmingly pro-free trade. Reagan negotiated major trade liberalization agreements, consistently advocated for reducing trade barriers, and viewed protectionism as economically destructive. The sections of the speech that Ford's ad used accurately reflect Reagan's general philosophy on trade, The Reagan Foundation's objection seems to be more about permission and context than outright misrepresentation. They argue that the ad used selective audio and didn't show Reagan's full position. But Ford's team has pushed back, with a spokesperson telling CBC News that the commercial uses an unedited excerpt from one of President Reagan's public addresses, which is available through public domain. The deeper issue here is that Ford has managed to weaponize Reagan's legacy against Trump in a way that no American politician has successfully done. Republican lawmakers have been reluctant to directly challenge Trump's trade policies, partly because doing so risks alienating his base. But when Reagan himself is making the anti-tariff argument, it becomes much harder for Republicans to dismiss. This dynamic is already playing out in interesting ways. Trump's decision to terminate trade talks over an advertisement makes him look petty and thin-skinned, exactly the opposite of the strong negotiator image he tries to project. Meanwhile, Ford gets to position himself as the reasonable party who's willing to pause the ads to resume talks, even while ensuring maximum exposure during the World Series. The economic stakes couldn't be higher. Canada is the United States' second largest trading partner after Mexico. Last year, the U.S. imported $412.7 billion worth of Canadian goods, while Canada purchased $349.4 billion in American products. The supply chains between the two countries are deeply integrated, particularly in sectors like automotive manufacturing, energy, and agriculture. Trump's tariffs aren't just hurting Canadian businesses, they're driving up costs for American consumers and disrupting established industrial networks. Ford's ad campaign is particularly focused on these economic realities. By featuring Reagan warning about job losses and economic collapse from trade wars, the ads directly challenge Trump's narrative that tariffs are an economic winner. The timing is also significant as the Supreme Court is scheduled to hear arguments on November 5th about the legality of Trump's reciprocal tariff strategy. The World Series element adds another fascinating dimension to this story. Sports have always been intertwined with politics, but it's rare to see a trade dispute play out so directly during a major sporting event. The Blue Jays' success has already become a source of national unity for Canadians at a time when U.S.-Canada relations are under severe strain. Ford's decision to keep the Reagan ad running during the games transforms each pitch into a potential political moment. Even other American sports teams are getting involved. The NFL's Buffalo Bills posted "Let's Go Blue Jays" on social media, showing support for Toronto. The Bills have historic ties to Toronto, having played some home games there in the past, and the Blue Jays' AAA affiliate is the Buffalo Bisons. It's a small but symbolic reminder that the U.S.-Canada relationship extends far beyond formal diplomacy. The international reaction has been telling as well. Pope Leo, speaking at a Vatican event, commented on the tension between the two countries, noting that two countries that we once considered the closest allies at times have become separated from one another. Even Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, typically aligned with more conservative positions, supported Ford's decision to pause the ads, saying it was the right move. What makes this entire episode so remarkable is how it reveals the limitations of Trump's negotiating style. His approach has always been based on the idea that he can use threats and pressure to force better deals. But Ford has essentially turned that strategy on its head. By using Reagan's own words, Ford has made it politically costly for Trump to defend his tariff policies. When Trump responds by terminating negotiations, he looks like he's throwing a tantrum rather than exercising strategic pressure. The timing of Ford's pause is also strategically brilliant. By announcing that the ads will stop on Monday, he gives Trump a face-saving way to restart negotiations while ensuring maximum exposure during the weekend's World Series games. It's a classic example of giving your opponent an off-ramp while still achieving your primary objective. Looking ahead, this incident could reshape how other countries approach trade disputes with Trump. Rather than engaging purely through diplomatic channels, Ford has shown that direct appeals to the American public, particularly using beloved American political figures, can be devastatingly effective. Other nations facing Trump's tariffs are likely taking notes. The episode also highlights the unique position of Canadian provincial premiers in the federal system. Unlike American governors, Canadian premiers have significant authority over trade-related issues, particularly in areas like natural resources and manufacturing. Ford has used this authority to essentially conduct his own foreign policy, sometimes in coordination with federal officials and sometimes independently. As the World Series begins and millions of Americans potentially see Reagan's anti-tariff message, the broader question is whether this will have any lasting impact on American trade policy. Public opinion polls have consistently shown that Americans are concerned about the economic impact of tariffs, particularly the way they drive up consumer prices. Ford's ad campaign, by using Reagan's authority, may help crystallize those concerns in a way that resonates with Republican voters. The ultimate irony is that Trump, who built his political career partly on claiming that other countries were taking advantage of America, now finds himself outmaneuvered by a provincial premier using a 37-year-old radio address. Ford has managed to turn Trump's own party's most revered figure against him, and he's doing it during one of the biggest cultural events of the year. Whether trade talks actually resume on Monday remains to be seen. Trump's track record suggests he's capable of changing his position quickly when it serves his interests. But Ford has already achieved something remarkable. He's shown that even a regional political leader can effectively challenge the President of the United States when armed with the right message and the right messenger. And that messenger, speaking from beyond the grave, just happens to be Ronald Reagan himself. As Canadian and American audiences tune in to watch the Blue Jays take on the Dodgers, they'll be witnessing more than just a baseball game. They'll be seeing the latest chapter in a trade war that's now being fought as much through television commercials and social media posts as through formal diplomatic channels. And in this particular battle, Doug Ford and Ronald Reagan appear to be winning,